It was a very long wait, but after lots of speculation and a strange PS3 tech demo, we finally got Final Fantasy VII Remake. How did it turn out? Well, this is my review on the game. The game was teased for a long time by Square Enix, as fans for many years were voicing that the original Final Fantasy VII should get a remake, mainly for the graphics since they look very much old and rough in certain parts. Remember, this was 1997 when the original came out. I personally don't mind some of the graphics in the game. To me, it was mainly the character models outside of combat which looked off. The interesting thing about the remake speculation was that Square actually announced that they would be remaking it alongside 8 and 9. This was all the way back in 2001, by the way. This, you could say, was the first time a remake was considered. The big reason as to why this never happened before was due to the large amount of resources and overall development it would have taken. As strange as it might sound, I honestly would have been okay if they had just updated the graphics only, as the core gameplay was fine for what it was. The team of course did not want to go down that route. The consistent part they always said was, if they were going to remake the game, it would have to be from the ground up. This said, we fast forward to E3 2005, which was basically during the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. We see what looks like the opening, but with modern graphics, and it looks great! And then the moment shows where it's just a tech demo to show off Square's Crystal Tools engine. Yeah, that happened. When this happened, there was more speculation that a remake would happen on the PS3, which was then further fueled with the game's 10th anniversary coming in 2007. But Square denied the rumors and said it's not happening, which made many upset, including myself. It's interesting to me though, because this was during the time when the other games/media were a thing, like Crisis Core, Advent Children, etc. So it would have been intriguing to see which direction they could have gone if it was for the PS3 instead. Hearing all this, however, did make one thing clear. People really wanted this special game to be remade. The next few years kind of went by quietly, with only ports of the original game coming to various platforms like PS3, PS4, PC, and more. In 2014, the director of the original game, Yoshinori Kitase, said once again that the game needed to be built from the ground up, which sparked up even more rumors. Finally, at E3 2015, a full decade after the tech demo, the trailer for Final Fantasy VII Remake was shown, and I will not deny I maybe yelled when this happened. I guess watching Advent Children a few days beforehand also contributed, since I had no clue it would even be a thing, but it actually happened. The promise was finally made. A big reason why now of all times for this remake was mainly due to the original staff's age. Most of them were either mid-40s or even mid to late 50s, and they did not want to move the project to a different generation without original staff on board. A very strange thing happened though during the early stages of development when it was announced that Tetsuya Nomura would be the director of the game. Why does that sound strange, you may ask? Well, it's because he was not actually informed right away about it. In an interview with Famitsu, he mentioned that he was watching an internal presentation when only at that moment he found out he was the director. It was assumed that Kitase would be the director since he was the one for the original, but that was not the case as he was a producer for the remake. What doesn't help is that Nomura at the time was working on other projects, most notably Kingdom Hearts 3. Yeah, imagine already having tons of projects going at once and then finding out, oh, I am the director for one of the most anticipated remakes like ever. Just a very strange thing to take place. So after all that, you would think, okay, things will most likely be winding down and there should be no problems going on now. Except it was revealed in late 2015 that the remake would be in multiple parts, with the first one being only in Midgar. This stirred up a lot of worry and discussion. I myself was concerned since Midgar was important, but didn't think it had that much to it. Let's just say they did not disappoint with that, but we will talk more about that later. One of the last things I wanted to mention was that around 2017, it was announced that CyberConnect 2 would be leaving the project and Square would move it to in-house. It also meant that all work up to that point had been scrapped. For many years there was a lot of worry about the project, and when news like this happens, it doesn't paint it in a good light. Even with many good things like it being an Unreal Engine, concerns from fans were very much a thing. With all of this said, let's put the dev history on hold and get into the game itself. Note that this is the PS5 Intergrade version. The game itself is an action role-playing game set in its own universe, so you do not have to worry about playing the other Final Fantasy games before playing this one. You can jump straight into here. Now, there will be no spoilers in this review, but one thing that is noteworthy is that the game of course does reference a lot of stuff in the compilation of FF7. So it is a case of playing or even just getting to know the other media will help. Plus, some of the other media in the compilation is good and at times gives them feels. Though you can enter this as your first game and it will work. Just wanted to note that. The story of the game starts out with you playing as Cloud Strife, an ex-soldier of Shinra who is now a mercenary in the world known as Gaia. He takes a job to help a group known as Avalanche take out a Mako reactor, since it's believed that draining Mako is killing the planet. And interestingly enough, the reactors are made by Shinra, who let's just say most do not like at all. They have been very well known for manipulating the media and such. During this first mission, Cloud gets to meet up with members of Avalanche, Biggs, Wedge, Jesse, and Barrett. He has some interesting conversations with them. Cloud and Barret get to the bottom of the reactor, and after defeating the Scorpion Sentinel boss, they set off the bomb, which ends up destroying the reactor, though it was not intended to do that much damage. The good news is that they escaped. After that, they meet up at Sector 7 slums where they talk with Tifa, who is Cloud's childhood friend, while planning the next mission against Shinra. Plus, along the way, Cloud meets a local florist known as Aerith, who is pretty cool. That is the basic setup of the game. Now, seeing how this remake is going to be in multiple parts, it's important to know that this game covers the Midgar section of the game, which, despite sounding bad, they actually do a really good job with what they have. Of course, I won't go into major story stuff, but seeing these iconic characters after many iterations is so cool. I think what does it for me are the interactions, and even though the characters have new voice actors, they all nail their roles so good. In general, the game has some subtle stuff which one may not think is a big deal, but having it in the game is huge. Even something like subtle expressions on faces, certain lines of dialogue, it helps out in a game like this. And of course, knowing that this is a remake of a PS1 game, it certainly was not easy going from the old polygons to full-on models. Keep in mind that over the years we've seen them in other stuff like crossovers, but having them like this in their own game is special. Now let's move on to the gameplay of 7 Remake. Since it's in Midgar, it's mostly a linear route from point A to point B, but there is content during the game. Most of the time you'll be going through the main story, and since it's chapter-based, the game helps out when giving objectives to complete. These are shown with a blue icon on the map. Throughout the game, you will be exploring Midgar with the main goal of gathering allies to take down Shinra. The structure doesn't really change much either, but there are points in the game where you can do side quests. During these sections, you have a choice of doing only a few and advancing to the next main quest, or doing all of them to get a nice bonus. These bonuses aren't huge per se, but they are a nice incentive to help vary up the game. The one issue with the side quests, however, is that some of them arrive at points before you cannot go back to them, and it's pretty obvious when that happens. You can go back via the chapter select, but it is something that can hamper a first playthrough. Not the worst thing, but it is something to know. A spin on that, however, is the side quests are mostly fun. There are a few that are not great, but most are good or at least decent. These also have an objective structure to them, but they are not nearly as long, and the map does a good job at pointing you in the right direction. They can also vary from finding people, to clearing out monsters, or even fighting a big monster that you may recognize. The side quests also have their own icons on the map, which is green. Keep in mind that even when doing certain objectives in the game, there's always treasure lying around, so make sure to pick it up. It could contain anything from items to even full-on weapons. Let's get into the battles themselves now. They are nicely paced and flashy. The game does a nice job at showing the mechanics when playing it, so whenever there is a pause in combat showing something, keep an eye out. The main objective whenever in battles is to get an enemy's HP to 0 in order to win. This can be done with either physical or magic attacks. You start out with using normal hits, which usually get done early. These moves are done by just pressing the button and it's instant. It helps that you can lock on them when fighting. Some of these moves vary, but we will get to that later. In battles, you can block and dodge. Both of these are important if you want to save health. Some attacks cannot be blocked, however. You can also use the character's unique skill, and this mainly works when you're controlling that specific character. Even when you have a party of 3, you can only have full control over one party member at a time unless you switch. These attacks are nice, but they might not always get done, so this is where tactical mode comes into play. With tactical mode, you most of the time need to have ATB built up in order to use it, as the mode takes up segments of the bar. The way to build up the bar is by doing basic attacks. When you have ATB built up, you can do abilities, magic, or items. Abilities can be something like a heavier attack, a special type of healing, seeing what enemy stats look like, and so on and so forth. There is a lot that goes into the abilities, and they are important as they can turn the tide of battle really quickly. My favorites have to be the ones that do massive damage though. Usually they look really cool, and having some style is nice to have during fights. You can also use magic in this mode, and magic in this game is really fun to use. Most of them take up only one bar, and the amount of magic you can use is a lot. Some of it though you might not be able to use since it requires slots in your equipment, so keep that in mind when choosing who has what magic. Of course, like many Final Fantasy games, you have healing magic, elemental magic, defense magic, time magic, and more. The great part about using magic in this game is that when magic levels up, you can still use the lower leveled spell. So even when you unlock Thunder Ga, you can still use Thunder if you want as an example. Next up we have items you can use, and here the items can vary from potions, Phoenix Downs, status removal items, and more. Maybe the most notable thing about items, and this also applies to healing magic, is that you can do them when not in battle. Whenever you're walking around not fighting, you can heal, so that's pretty nice. Lastly, you can do the famous limit breaks. When your limit meter is maxed out, you can do a strong move, and the best part about these is that it doesn't matter if you have ATB or not. Once that meter is filled, you can use it whenever you want, and it's amazing. I mentioned earlier how you have a party of 3 but only control one at a time. The thing is that you can still give ATB commands to other party members, so if their ATB is full, this will help out a ton, especially if you need something like buffs. One part that should be noted is that when using magic, if timed wrong, you could get knocked out of a spell animation. Be careful, as this could lead to game overs if one needs an emergency heal. At least in this game, magic gets restored at a nice pace. That is the basics of combat, but there is actually a lot more that goes into it. This leads into what actually might be my favorite part of this remake, and that is how each party member is different in combat. This actually reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy XV, where it was the same thing, but here it's a little bit more refined and it pays off so good. Plus, it actually fixes a major issue that the original FF7 had, which is, in that game, every character felt the same. Sure, a few could hit flying enemies by default, but really, minus that and the limit breaks, there was not much difference between them. Here, it's a complete 180 as each character fights differently. When you start off with Cloud and Barret, right away you can see as Cloud is the swordsman, while Barret is the gunner. Cloud does good damage at a decent pace, while Barret does lower damage but at a higher rate. Plus, every character has their own unique skill to use whenever controlling them. Take advantage of this since it will do nice damage. And Cloud's counter is so good, I cannot believe I did not know it even existed on my first run of this game. So, looking at it, this is one of the best things the remake did, which was make sure every character felt different when playing as them. I have to give some spotlight to Tifa, who in this game can do some absolute incredible moves when fighting. The moves she has is so cool to look at and fit her style really well, especially since her moves are really easy to combo into. In general, the combo potential is almost limitless. Another great combat mechanic they did well are the summons. Just like in Final Fantasy XV, when you're low on health, the summon can appear. However, this time you can actually control it. It has a few moves it can do in tactical mode, plus it does its finishing move, which will do nice damage. As a little bonus, getting them is also really fun, where you can use the VR missions in order to fight them. If you win the fight, you can summon them in battle. These guys are really good and help out a lot, so if you can beat them in fights, know that you'll have a great ally in combat. These mechanics also help when it comes to staggering enemies. Yes, those that may remember, this is not the first time stagger is in a Final Fantasy. It most notably showed up in the 13 trilogy. However, here it's a little different, as stagger during most fights puts enemies in a vulnerable state. To stagger, you either have to keep hitting on an enemy, use magic, or hit a specific part. This system is really good in this game, as it helps the player try to use more abilities and stuff with the characters. When you beat enemies in combat, you get experience points to level up while also getting AP and SP. AP helps with unlocking higher spells in the materia, and SP helps with unlocking weapon upgrades. During the game, you can upgrade your weapons, which takes you to this very interesting screen. Reminds me of a certain other game. Yep, just like the stagger, this is another inspired thing from FF13, the Crystarium lookalike, though this one for some reason I like a lot more from a visual standpoint. The upgrades themselves vary from stat boosting, more materia slots, etc. They seem at first like they wouldn't make much impact, but as it builds up, they make a difference in battle. A nice touch they did was each weapon has its own SP, so if you use SP on one weapon, the others don't decrease. Another addition to the weapons is the abilities. Each weapon in the game has a specific ability that if you use enough, you can learn it and it's permanently available to use, even if you are using a different weapon. This is awesome for many reasons. The fact that you can learn a ton of abilities and not even have to use a specific weapon is great, as it can help create builds. It helps that learning the abilities doesn't take that long either, especially if you can get a proficiency bonus with it. It's a subtle feature that does a lot for the combat. Now, these mechanics are important, but as with other games in the franchise, we have the equipment for each party member. This is where you can equip new weapons, armor, and accessories. These can be obtained in shops throughout Midgar or in treasure chests. Same goes for the materia, which is the foundation of the magic. When it comes to weapons and armor, they have different amounts of materia slots that you can use, though this can be fixed with upgrading weapons. Armor cannot be upgraded, so you'll have to get new ones if you want more slots with them. Throughout Midgar, there are many locations where you can buy stuff for your party. This includes the before mentioned weapons and armor, but some also have items and materia. Some of them might not even have a shopkeeper. Yes, you can literally get stuff from a vending machine in this game. Something about that is very amusing to me. One note about the machine is that sometimes you might see items on sale for cheap, and it's worth getting them since it'll help out a ton. Usually the prices are a steal as well. Vending machines are also nice because whenever there is one around, there is usually a bench right beside it where you can rest up and restore HP and MP, which is always nice. Besides the main story content, there is also what might be one of my favorite bits of side content, which is the VR missions. Same goes for the arena fights as well. They are mostly battles in a small arena where you take on enemies, and there is a good amount of them. Some of these battles are pretty tough, so if you thought the main game was easy, give these fights a try. You might be surprised. For me, the best part about them is that you almost have to fight them a few times in order to get their patterns down. If you do, however, you can get some nice rewards, so be prepared. Now at the start I mentioned how this is the PS5 version, which of course means it's the Intergrade version. The remake was originally on PS4 and came out in April 2020. A year and a bit later, in June 2021, we got the Intergrade version, which was a nice upgrade. It adds some nice touches in the gameplay and helped out loading screens. The most notable addition with Intergrade is the Intermission DLC, which centers around Yuffie and newcomer Sonon. Let's just say this DLC might be my favorite in a Final Fantasy game, which I was not expecting. I won't go too much on it, but the combat is amazing, and just like the main game, the subtle stuff they have here is really smooth. But the big thing I loved out of just getting the PS5 version was the 60 FPS. This was a game changer in so many ways. It helps the combat, it even made the air combat a tiny bit more bearable. It just made the game a greater experience. And on the topic of experience, how could I forget to mention the music in this game? The music in 7 Remake is top tier for me. There are tons of remix tracks which sound good and recognizable from the original. There are some new tracks as well that sound great, and in general, the music adds so much to both exploring and combat. Bringing back the old staff not only for the music, but for the game itself really shows. It's safe to say that 7 Remake is a great game. Yes, there are some questions about certain things, and the fact that the game ends on a cliffhanger is to be expected, but it's still great. The characters are amazing, combat is fun, soundtrack is always nice to listen to. It just hit the mark on so many areas, and you love to see it. Now this does leave the big question. Will the following parts be just as good or better? I know this might age badly, which will cause many "this aged well" comments years later, but I think yes, the next parts will be good. I have a lot of faith in creative Square Enix that they will make good decisions, and really, I think the gameplay is pretty solid and can only get better. The story has brought up questions, but I believe this will work out in the end. I guess we will find out if this ages well or not. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it and want to see more, check out the other videos on the channel where I mostly cover RPGs and hack and slash games. If you want updates on when new videos are coming out, follow them on socials like Twitter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.